Most visitors come to Savannah looking for history. Civil War ghost stories, things like that. Haunted houses like, well, the Kehoe House. That's where legend and tourism blend together. But walking along here in Columbia Square, the story shifts into something older. It's much far less remembered, and it was a name that once described America itself. And that name was Columbia. And almost nobody visiting here today can explain what Columbia means. I've been doing tours in Savannah for over, 20 years. I used to walk through this square pointing out the Davenport House and the Kehoe House behind me. And I was weaving historic preservation and architecture into the story of the city. I felt it was complete until one day I hit a gap I couldn't ignore. I realized I didn't actually know what Columbia meant. So I went back to homeschool and studied it. Then after asking hundreds of guests on my tours over the years, I realized none of them knew the story either. So I did what I had to do. I studied it. We see the name everywhere. Columbia, South Carolina, Columbia River out west, Columbia University, and the District of Columbia, the capital of our nation. But the symbol behind it it has largely vanished. And the meaning behind it has largely disappeared too. And the person tied to that symbol she's almost never mentioned. Today we're going to rebuild that forgotten identity. But first we have to understand something basic about how nations tell stories about themselves. Before flags carried the emotional weight they do now, countries relied on human symbols, figures that could represent ideals in a single image. Britain had Britannica, Greece had Zeus, and later on, France had Mary Ann. And in the American colonies, writers turned toward a poetic name derived from Columbus, Columbia. At first, it meant the Western Hemisphere, a geographic idea, North and South America as one imagined space. But during the American Revolution, that shifted. Columbia stopped being a place. She became a personification of America itself. Liberty, virtue, national identity, it was given a human form. And once that happened, she didn't just represent geography, she represented a future nation trying to define itself before it ever existed. But symbols like that don't appear on the scene fully formed. They are built through language, argument, and persuasion. One of the most important forces behind that process was an unlikely writer in Boston. By 1772, that writer had already become the subject of public controversy. Her poetry showed mastery of classical literature, religion, and philosophy at a level many educated Europeans refused to believe possible. So a group of elite Boston men gathered to examine her work and determine whether she had actually written it. They weren't reviewing poetry. They were testing whether she was capable of authorship at all. Think about that. Think about what that means. 18 of the most powerful men in colonial Boston sitting in judgment of a 19-year-old girl. They were not just questioning her work, but they were questioning her capacity to produce it. And the outcome did not go the way they expected. She answered their scrutiny with precision. She demonstrated knowledge, they could not dismiss. And they ultimately signed an attestation confirming the poems were hers. But the contradiction was already in place, because the same woman being validated as a literary genius was also still legally restricted. Her name was Phillis Wheatley, a teenage black girl, a slave, born in West Africa around 1753. She was kidnapped as a child and brought to Boston aboard a slave ship that gave her her first name, Phillis. Purchased by the Wheatley family, she received an education that was extraordinary for an enslaved girl in colonial America. By her mid-teens, she was writing poetry steeped in classical tradition, theology, and enlightenment of thought. And that created a problem for the world around her, because intellectual equality undermined the assumption used to justify slavery. Symbolism was becoming political language. Writers increasingly used Columbia as the feminine embodiment of America. Liberty against tyranny, virtue under pressure, a nation still forming its own identity. And Wheatley entered that symbolic space directly. In 1775, she wrote a poem addressed to George Washington, using Columbia as part of that political imagination, linking the revolution to moral and divine legitimacy. In fact, she scribbled at the top, "To His Excellency General Washington," and that became its name. Poetry matters because the revolution wasn't only fought with weapons. It was fought through meaning, through symbols. And Columbia was one of the most powerful symbols. It was so meaningful that George Washington surveyed the new capital city for the young country, and he named the District of Columbia. That's how we got Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. But Wheatley existed inside a contradiction she could not escape, because the same society that spoke constantly about liberty refused to extend it universally. And speaking of something we can't escape, that brings us to some deals you can't escape if you go down below to our affiliate links and book a bike or Segway tour, or look at our books that we sell. If you do, Lens on History, we get a small commission, but it still costs the same. No extra cost to you, and you'll be helping put our episodes like this one about Columbia and Phillis Wheatley up. Which, by the way, freedom did not bring stability. After the revolution, there was economic collapse in the new nation. A lack of patronage for Wheatley left her struggling. She married, endured hardship, and died in poverty in 1787 at roughly 30 years old. Now step back. Right now I'm sitting in the square that was shaped by National Historic Preservation and Architecture. It's beautiful here. But the deeper story of America is not in the lawns and fountains and buildings alone. It's in the ideas those things sit on top of. And sometimes that becomes clear when you leave the square entirely. We spent this episode looking around a structured, ordered square in Savannah, a symbol of the intellectual vision of a new nation. But to really understand America that was formed in the 1770s, you have to look beyond this architecture. You have to look at the traditions forged in the heat of fire pits that were cooking great food. Which comes to mind because I'm getting hungry. So let's go find something to eat. Okay, Becky and I are headed to the Sandfly Barbecue with our buddy Gus. It's about 6 miles southeast of the historic district. And this barbecue business stands in a seemingly unremarkable but incredible history spot. very historic. It was once a black settlement, and it was a streetcar stop for folks on the way out to Isle of Hope, Georgia. We really do come to Sandfly Barbecue all the time, so notice they're not sponsoring us. But should they ever want to? Now, just a few hundred yards away from us, old trolley tracks intersected with the historic 1910 Grand Prix Raceway. One of the earliest in a matter of fact, that road right in front of the restaurant was once called the best stretch of automobile raceway in the United States. That was by the folks who put on the Vanderbilt Cup race here around that time. As a point of interest, the oyster shell covered pile of dirt across the road from the barbecue shop is a remnant of the bank turn built for the Grand Prix races. They come down Ferguson and head to Isle of Hope. And this pile is all that's left of it. Very few people know or care what it is today, even though back then around 500,000 spectators flocked to Savannah to watch the races. But then that's another episode. Stay tuned for that one. As for barbecue here, it's the South in your mouth. That's what I call it. Good Southern food. Good stuff, baby. Okay, we're back. As for Columbia, the symbol, doesn't disappear after the revolution. She transforms. In the 19th century, she becomes one of the most common national symbols in American visual culture. Paintings, political cartoons, patriotic songs. And one of the most famous is the Progress political cartoon by John Gast, where he shows her no longer representing the revolution, but expansion. The meaning shifted from independence to movement, from identity to destiny, manifest destiny. Probably studied that in school. By the way, if you have any opinions on this episode or just want to say hello, put a note down below. We'd love to hear from you. So why did Columbia disappear? Not because she was erased, but because she was replaced. In 1886, a new symbol arrived in America. That symbol was simpler, more direct, less mythology, and more immediate. It was legible. And over time, she absorbed the emotional role Columbia once held. And Columbia didn't vanish from the names on maps, well, she disappeared as a shared idea, yes, but the names are still around. Columbia University, Columbia River, Columbia Pictures, Columbia Square. The name is still present, but no longer understood. Which brings us back here, because Columbia Square is one of the places where the name still exists without explanation. And that silence matters. Because what we're really looking at is not just a forgotten symbol. It's a forgotten conversation about what America dreamed and believed and was becoming, and who was allowed to shape that story. And that includes Phillis Wheatley, because she wasn't just reflecting America, she was challenging it carefully, indirectly, and with persuasion. Wheatley's work exposed the central contradiction of the founding era, a nation built on liberty while sustaining exclusion. Phillis Wheatley didn't resolve it, she revealed it. And Columbia in her hands wasn't decoration, it was a claim. And it's a question America is still working on. Symbols don't disappear when they're replaced. They disappear when they're no longer understood. And that brings us right back here again. where we started. Columbia Square, a place with a name that very few people know what it means. Very few explanations for it. Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty. And we've been with her longer than we revered Columbia. Many immigrants who entered New York Harbor on the way to Ellis Island remembered and loved her as well. As for the nation, our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, those were original claims that have been constantly challenged over the years, and they have been debated and studied every day since the Revolution. Sometimes they need some maintenance and cleaning just to find out the original intent of the founders. Every vehicle needs a good wash and polishing now and then, I guess. But our nation has been no different. We traded the poetic, intellectual Columbia for a colossal Lady Liberty. We traded the voice of a poet for the stateliness of a statue. Sound like Muhammad Ali. So, it came from a girl. So did the girl name America? I'm not sure. But she did name the symbol for the country that gave a new idea at its birth, or actually before it was born. So I suppose we could call her the godmother of the United States. Here in Columbia Square, we have a monument for 7 ladies who helped save Savannah's past by preserving it. And we should. Their contribution to the city, and well, it was heroic and responsible for the city and how it looks today. But there's no monument in the square for Phillis Wheatley, nor for the story of Columbia. Maybe there should be. Maybe right next to the other 7 ladies, maybe a gallery of the women who built and preserved symbols for our great nation. I don't know, maybe right over there. So if you didn't already know this story, now you know. Remember to hit the like button and check it out. Check out our other stories of hidden history at lensonhistory.com. And we'll see you next time.